Hello, everybody. My name is Kathy. I'm from Huntington's, Queensland. Welcome to this, our second and recorded version of our occupational therapy workshop. For those that have joined us live today, you, of course, will receive a certificate, a workshop participation certificate, and you will also obviously receive the recording within the next few days. I'd like to start today first off, by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are here today. Again, thanks everybody for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the interest in attending the workshop with Talisha. For those that didn't participate last time, Talisha is an occupational therapist based in Townsville, has had extensive experience with HD families, and she has been a godsend to us at Huntington's, Queensland. She is a wealth of knowledge, and like me, I'm sure that you will get a lot out of the next hour with Talisha. And remember, she is open to questions. So if you've got questions, please save them for the end and she will be more than happy to answer them. Before I hand over to Talisha, I just want to also mention we do have Lauren Ward, who is our educator, unfortunately, who can't join us here today, but we do offer a information and educational service for service providers, support workers and the like. And if anybody would be interested in that, please feel free to contact us, and we're more than happy to have a chat and facilitate that for you. It's obviously not just on occupational therapy, but it's a good overview on the disease itself, what to expect, what services are available out there and the like. So if you are interested, please feel free just to reply to the email that obviously you received from me with the Zoom details today, and I'll put you in touch with Lauren. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Talisha. Thank you again for doing this for us, Talisha. Over to you.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Talisha. So I'm a team leader and senior occupational therapist that works for a company in Townsville called opportunOTy. So I'll provide just some information, general information today about occupational therapy and Huntington's disease. Look, I'm by no means an expert, but I just thought I would be a great platform to share some of the therapeutic techniques that may be beneficial to you, that I've found quite helpful over the years that I've been in OT and that I've been working with people with Huntington's disease. If you do have any questions, feel free, like I said, just to, like we just said, just to leave them to the end and then we can discuss. I'm happy to have like an open platform. So just as an overview, these are some of the things that we'll be talking about. So just some resources that I've used, symptoms, risks, assessments, intervention techniques, equipment, things in relation to memory, behaviour and after death. And then, like we just said, just some questions if you do have any. So these are some of the resources that I've used quite extensively when working with people with Huntington's. The slides and such will be available to anyone, so feel free to jot them down, or like I said, they'll be available to you, so you can definitely utilise them. But these specific three I've used quite heavily just to guide some of that therapy, that and also just to provide some of that background information and some history and some education information, and also resources to family. So I won't go into detail about some of the symptoms, but I just wanted to give an overview. So these are some of the symptoms associated with Huntington's disease. Some of the clients I've worked with have had quite significant chorea and those involuntary movements. So some of these will be in relation to sort of that more physical motor type associated with Huntington's, but I do talk about sort of a broad range as well. So some of the risks factors associated. So social death is what is considered a death prior to a biological death. So I did a lot of research on social death. It comes in handy within a multiple factor system with not just Huntington's disease, but other progressive neurological conditions. So social death is when someone's isolated in their home and unable to access the community or engage in things that they find really meaningful to them. And so it's pretty much they just are lying in bed dying before they're actually dead. So that's the social death aspect. Some other things are obviously aspiration, pneumonia, cognitive decline, the progression of the disease. So that's obviously, it is a progressive condition. Falls are quite common as well. So how do we limit falls, or how do we prevent them? What strategies can we put in place? What equipment can we use? Occupational deprivation. So again, not being able to engage in those really meaningful and really important activities. Environmental barriers. So again, this is more someone with those motor symptoms. So accessing the community, stairs, things like that, that as OTs we consider and that we look for. Neglect of hygiene, so them not potentially, like, people not showering, and then the risks associated with having poor hygiene. Carer fatigue and stress. This is something that's quite common, especially if there's a history. Like, there's usually like a family history of Huntington's disease. So when you've got multiple family members, it can lead to quite a high level of fatigue and stress in family members, and it's something to be really, really important about. It's something to consider when you're first introducing yourself and first engaging with that client, making sure that you not only consider your client, but you also consider their family as well. Decreased quality of life, suicide and suicidal ideation, discrimination. So there have been times where one of my clients was declined from accessing a pub because they thought he was intoxicated. However, that was not the case. It was just as a result of his career commitments. So there are things to be mindful of. Behaviours of concern. So there can be complex behaviours associated with Huntington's. Vulnerability and exploitation, lack of insight, and social exclusion and isolation. So assessment, so it's really important to obviously assess the home environment depending on their function, and making sure that you future plan as much as possible. So that looks like, do they require complex home modifications potentially in the future? Making sure that you sort of assess all aspects. We tend to use the Westmead assessment. It gives a really nice overview of that home environment and sort of things that you might need to consider or to look at in the case of future planning. So functional assessment, so obviously looking at, depending on what the symptoms are, whether it's physical, cognitive, psychosocial, whether it's a mix of all three, to making sure that you tailor the assessments as much as possible to that client. And it's also really important to do outcome measures. So something that I've done in the past, because it is a progressive condition, I'll assess someone when I first meet them, and then I'll say reassess them with the exact same scores, and I'll put comparison scores in the functional report, because it shows that decline and that sort of justification and evidence for the need for more support. Consider, if appropriate, like I just said before, carer strain and stress assessment. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll just hand over and I'll provide a piece of paper to the carer and say, hey, are you able to fill this out? And sometimes, depending on the situation, you'll need to grasp whether or not you can say that sort of out loud and ask those questions, whether you, like I said, you need to hand that paper over and get that carer to sort of fill that out, because they might not want to make the client feel like they're a burden, and that might be something that is difficult for them to sort of discuss. So it's really worthwhile sort of trying to figure that out, and then allowing them the opportunity to discuss with you some things that could be very overwhelming to them, and where I suppose like you could come in play there and provide some recommendations, some strategies or referrals potentially. Ensuring that depending on engagement, you recommend all supports required. So sometimes when we're engaged as OTs, we need to make sure that our job is to look holistically at the person and their situation. So we really need to be looking at, do they have a support coordinator, physio, speech, psychologist, exercise phys, podiatrist, dietitian, wound care nurse. So they may not need a wound care nurse initially, they may not need a speech pathologist initially, but it's really good to start thinking about, again, that future planning. And it's not just for Huntington's, it can be for other progressive conditions, to engage in those services initially, especially when you've got someone potentially with complex behaviours. It's good to have a common person involved. That way they know who their speech is, they know who their OT is, they know who their physio is. So just keeping those things in mind and making sure you make required recommendations based on your initial appointment. I find notably what's often missed in Huntington's is the dietitian. When you do have someone with correct movements, they burn quite a lot of energy. And so obviously, like, our skin is our biggest organ, so we really need to make sure that their diet is reasonable and able to manage those movements and keep up with that energy being sort of used, so that way, you know, they can have the right amount coming in, their skin can be nourished, and they can be getting the right nutrition. So I found like that has been in association sometimes with the wound care nurse. You need to look at like all of the factors associated, and sometimes, like I said, dietitian is often missed on that list. So intervention, so any services being provided should be explained to all relevant and key stakeholders, including the family. So it's really important that you make sure you discuss your role within that family, that situation, those circumstances, so that everyone knows what's going on. So I find often, which is my next stop point after I finish an appointment, I'll send an email handover every single time, without a doubt. Because if there's multiple stakeholders involved, if you're getting the one information across to one support worker, it might not get handed over the right way or said in the same sort of context, and some bits of information could get missed, and they might be really pivotal points and really important bits of information. So I would recommend suggesting email handovers after all health professional appointments. You know, if is there a key support worker that's going to distribute that information, making sure that all of that is sort of discussed initially. There's stakeholders meetings and things like that, because what we don't want is we don't want information to be missed, and we don't want, you know, the physio working on something that you're not aware of, that you're working on something different, and potentially you could have been reinforcing certain things in your appointments. So yeah, I find email handovers very clear. Everyone gets the exact same information. And it also is a nice summary and very clear description of what's happened in the appointment and your recommendations going forward. Be mindful of fatigue, length of appointments, and what time of appointments. So again, in that initial asking those questions, when is best for you? Is it mornings? Is it more middle of the day? Is it afternoons? You know, you might find in the initial appointment that you can only get 30 minutes and you notice that they're starting to fatigue. So you might go, okay, just 30-minute appointments is what we can sort of achieve here. So just picking up those slight and subtle things is really important. So again, limiting the dual task performance. So example, cognitive and physical, rather keeping in mind if a person is walking, avoid engaging in conversation. So people with Huntington's have difficulties with the dual task performance. So making mindful of when and where you're discussing things. Is it when they're sitting and can concentrate on conversation? If support workers are out, making sure that they're not asking multiple questions while that person's walking, because they might have a lot of difficulty with that dual performance. It can increase the risk of falls and injury and things like that. So just being really mindful of that as well. So further on interventions, so making sure that you build a therapeutic relationship is really important. And what comes into consideration here is being really conscious of the power imbalance that comes as a therapist. So that happens in all of our clients. As soon as we walk into the room, there's already a power imbalance, and we need to be very conscious of that and how we can limit that as much as possible. So it might be that that client doesn't really engage well with people wearing uniforms, and you might need to wear something a little bit more casual. But hopefully some of that information has been provided to you before you go. That way you can, building that rapport and that connection with that person can be a little bit smoother. So for one of my clients, he loved Marvel movies. So that was sort of my in. I went in, we talked a lot about Marvel to sort of build some of that rapport and that connection. And we had quite a good therapeutic relationship as a result, because it was something that we talked about, you know, sort of during every appointment, not for very long, but just something like, oh, did you see that new movie? So on and so forth. It just enables trust in the client, and it shows that you really care about what they care about. So just building that trust, that rapport, and that connection is really, really important. Like I said, with the fatigue, you need to be careful and mindful of the length of appointments. The important thing about early intervention and engagement in certain things is they might be more willing to accept whatever recommendation you're putting in place. As the condition progresses, at times that insight and such can reduce. So early intervention is really, really important. Making sure that you establish goals, both now and for end of life goals. It can be a really difficult conversation, but it's a really important one. While they do have that cognitive capacity, you want to be identifying those end of life goals. It can be a very sensitive conversation, but it's about going about it the right way and making sure they're supported during those conversations and they're comfortable having them. Obviously, we want to make sure that we have client-centered goals. So always talking to the client. I find that sometimes, even if the client may have difficulties with responding, again, just making sure you talk directly to that person. So some things that I have come across with mobility is, so different wall padding for edging. So we have had a client who constantly sort of hit themselves on that wall edge, and we found just some wall padding. So a lot of the recommendations really come from thinking outside the box, which as OTs we're really, really good at. It's pretty much, it's a lot of sometimes what we do, as well as using evidence-based practice. However, sometimes there isn't that evidence there to say you need to put some padding on a wall edge. But you know it's the right strategy to be using, and that's sort of all the options that you've got. I have used the U-step walker before for clients with Huntington's. So the U-step walker, it has, rather than a normal walker, which is you just release the brakes and it goes, you have to hold the brakes up to activate to turn them off and keep holding them off. And then you can also change the resistance on the wheels. So it just helps if that person has difficulty with mobility and they tend to sort of pick up speed when they walk. That increased resistance can really slow that down and then support that mobility and sort of that ambulation. So that's something that I have found helpful. It's specifically tailored for people with Parkinson's, but some equipment can be used for other people. It's more so about trying to find out what equipment is available, but that's something that I've used before. So wheelchair, so obviously making sure that you do a full body assessment and postural assessment on that person. Something that I have found was very frustrating to me as a therapist was one of my clients who had those involuntary movements. I could not find a wheelchair that just was suitable to those movements. They would constantly injure themselves in the wheelchair, and as a professional, it's my responsibility to find a solution. And I really struggled for quite a long time to find a reasonable solution to that issue, because there seemingly was nothing out there that moved with that person until I stumbled on the Netty dynamic tilt and space, which since then I trialed with my client. They absolutely love it, and it's changed their life for the better. They've been able to access the community. a lot more, and they've been able to feel safer and more comfortable in their chair. So what it does is it pretty much just moves with the person. So, you know, she has those involuntary movements and she moves back, it moves back with her, and then it comes back to rest. And so you can also change those newtons of force depending on how significant those movements are, which again is just, it makes it so much more individualized to the person, because you can have one person who might have, you know, significant involuntary movements, and you might have someone with minor involuntary movements where they need some flex, but not to the level that some other people might need. So that's something that I've found very, very beneficial for some of my clients with those involuntary movements. So I can talk about that a little bit more if everyone has a one-to-one, but I have put a link in there just so you can see it and some videos of what that's like. So yeah, wheelchair consideration. So I won't sort of stay on this one for too long, but as we all know, sitting is a fatiguing activity due to the energy, muscle control, and strength required to maintain an erect trunk. So some people might need a tilt and space wheelchair, like depending on that. We want to maintain as much energy as possible for other activities. Obviously, we talk a lot about fatigue and energy conservation as OTs. And so we might need to look at tilt chairs. Like I said, injuries can occur if the wheelchair is not well padded. So I found that the wheelchair I couldn't pad it enough for it not to cause injury, which is why I then identified that the netty was a suitable option for my client. So future planning, do you need a manual chair or will you need a tilt and space? So the NDIS, which I work a lot in, is obviously very evidence-based, looking into the future. It has to have a lot of justification, be reasonable and necessary. So making sure you really try and future plan as much as possible and look at, is this manual chair really going to be suitable into the future if they've got those involuntary movements and they're sort of getting worse as time goes on, and is their muscle strength also getting weaker over time? So just some things to consider. It can be quite tricky, but again, the early intervention is really important. So being mindful of postural control and management, things like, you know, making sure it's not too wide or it's not too deep, and making sure that, if possible, that wheelchair also has the adjustment required. If you do need to adjust the width, say if they have potentially lost some weight or things like that. So making sure that the wheelchair is scripted and suitable currently and into the future. And then I've also just got, I won't go into too much detail, but things to consider if things are too wide, too deep, you know, looking at bony prominences and looking at why it's really important for positioning, for swallowing, gastrointestinal function, things like that. Pressure redistribution cushions, so obviously they're really important when you're scripting a wheelchair. So again, looking at what do they need currently, what's their current postural position, can it be used for into the future, can it be adjusted, can it be modified, changed. Making sure their feet are supported on the foot plate. So these are all just things that, you know, come into when you're scripting a wheelchair that you really need to consider. So sometimes, especially with Huntington's, it's really important to look at the multi-disc team involved. So have a chat to the physio, have a chat to the speechy. What sort of things might you script on that wheelchair to support swallowing? What sort of things might you look at for positioning or movement? It's really good to engage that multidisciplinary team because it is really important and there can be quite a lot of things to consider. So transfer, so this is something that, again, is really important, especially when we've got those motor symptoms. So heavily transferring into a chair. So high back chairs against a wall, although you do have to be careful of the damage potentially to the wall. Sturdy furniture, so quite heavy duty furniture. You also need to be mindful of heavy duty equipment. So some things just won't last the length of time. And you need to look at, is this piece of equipment going to be sturdy enough, heavy duty, to support that person if they do have those sort of movements. You can look at lift chairs, but as said, you need to be mindful. There are specific Huntington's chairs that you can get. However, they do operate a little bit differently to the ones that we're used to looking at. So they don't really come up. As such, they're not really a stand. They more lift. So that person the transfer height just gets higher. They don't really tip them as other lift chairs do. But they are quite robust. So that's also something to consider. Hoisting. So this is something that I have come across quite a little bit. I had some issues with the safety around hoisting and some of those involuntary movements, and again struggling to figure out what's going to be suitable. So what I have found is a 4-point spreader bar was the best option, because it meant that they were further away from the frame as much as possible, and they significantly reduced their risk, and they weren't really able to hit anything around them. We used pivot frames, and unfortunately, they were too close, and again, the person with those movements sort of was hitting them. And although they're great because you can pivot, it just wasn't suitable to that person. So gantry frames are also really good, especially if you do have someone with those involuntary movements, just because it is just literally an A-frame. It picks the person up, goes across, puts the person down. So usually that's for people who only transfer via a hoist and don't tend to mobilise, because obviously if they were to have a fall somewhere where there wasn't the A-frame hoist, getting them up would be quite difficult because it wouldn't be a portable hoist. So again, lots of things to consider. I wish there was a one-all for everyone, but we know that that's just not the case. As OTs, we look at everyone very individually, holistically, and it's our job to sort of identify what's going to be best for that person. So self-care and hygiene. So one of the OTs for her client, so she put padding around the system. So he was struggling to press the button, and so they built up the button material. It was like a molded, hardened something, and he was able to independently sort of press that himself, and that was something that created and provided quite a lot of independence and also some dignity in being able to engage in the self-care task of toileting. So it's something to consider. Again, like I said before, there's some things that you really need to think that are outside of the box, that you might not have used before, but it's about trying to find out what's going to be the best option to solve that issue, so that that person can have that independence. So again, purchasing a toilet seat with sturdy bolts might be something. Tilt and space commode may be appropriate depending on the need. But again, you need to look at how sturdy and how robust that commode is if they do have those movements. Because again, like just the weak points where equipment sort of has that adjustment can fail over time depending on movements and things like that. Visuals are also something that we've used before to promote that independence in showering or toileting. Just steps on what to do next is really important. So visuals really go a long way. So in relation to sleep, so we use the SWEP assessment for clinical consideration. So I find that one quite a thorough assessment, just because when we discuss sleep, there's a lot to consider in relation to entrapment and asphyxiation. So we really need to be making sure that the equipment that we're recommending is suitable and has taken into consideration all of those risks. So we have prescribed the Huntington's bed before, but it does come with its own risks. So the Huntington's Nova Core bed is specific for Huntington, so it's got padded side rails. It's completely padded. The side rails do come up and down, and then you can also get different side rails. So some have rounded, some are flat. But again, you need to look at future planning and things like that. So I have gotten them for some of my clients with Huntington's quite early on, but they're able to make that decision that that's the best option for them. However, like I said, there are considerations such as you can only fit certain mattresses in those beds, but they all are fully custom to width and length and things like that to the client. So one of my clients was quite tall, so it had to be custom length. So floor line beds and double beds to increase the transfer space. So if appropriate, again, it depends on your assessment that you do. You again need to look at, is that going to cause more of an issue for entrapment and asphyxiation? So that's how we've justified to the NDIS. We've actually taken photos of the entrapment risks associated with sort of normal rails and a normal high-low bed. So fallout mats, if you want to avoid having the rails, fallout mats really important. So obviously when you lower the bed, it can never go all the way to floor line with the mattress. There's always a discrepancy. But if you've got sort of like a thinner profile mattress and the bed can go as low as possible, then a fallout mat might be suitable. But again, like I said before, there's not a one-stop shop. It's sort of you need to identify what's going to be best for your client, what does the environment look like, and what does the future potentially look like for that client. So some little things like you can reduce the slipping down the bed by just elevating the head and applying the knee brake, just because we have had over time, like I've had quite a lot of ETs ask me that, and it's like most people know it, but especially when you're first coming out, it can be something that's new. So it's really simple just to stop sliding and stopping those shear forces by just applying a little bit of elevation and a little bit of knee brake. So again, future planning, looking at pressure redistribution mattresses, what's going to be the best option for that person now and into the future. But again, it depends on that person and that person's need, because they might need maybe a foam and an air combination. They might just need a foam. They might need just an air. Again, it comes down to your assessment. Like I use the water load to identify that risk and things like that. But I also consider other things. Sometimes the water load doesn't, although it gives you a score, which is great, you know, can that person reposition? No. Well, then they're going to be a higher risk than someone. Say two people might have this score of 20, but one person can reposition, one person can't. Their risk in itself is very different. Monitoring systems, if required, so obviously you need consent to monitor that person, but it may be something that they require, maybe something that they're happy with. They may feel safer with a monitoring system. Again, just discussing that with that client and making sure they're involved in the entire process and that they have the options to choose what's best for them. So again, in relation to sleep, so these are just some things and some evidence that specifically relates to Huntington's and things to consider in relation to promoting a quality sleep. So I often say, and I said it at the Huntington's Forum, so sleep is a non-negotiable biological necessity. And often I'll put that in my AT request to the NDIS to say these are the reasons we're justifying these things, because everybody needs sleep. We can't go without it. It's important for everything that we do. It's important for engaging in activities during the day, during the night, in the morning. You know, we need sleep to function. If we don't have sleep, there can be multiple risk factors involved if we don't get enough sleep, and quality sleep in that sense as well. So insomnia is quite common in people with Huntington's disease. So again, like I've got some strategies here and some things to promote that quality sleep. So falls is quite common as well. So we need to look at having a falls action plan. Do they have a means of calling for assistance? Do we need to look at a personal response alarm? Is there a lockbox out there? That way, if that person is unconscious, the paramedics have been able to gain access to that home and provide support to that person. Is there a guideline on how to get off the floor? Does manual handling training need to be done? Making sure that everyone's on the same page on what the falls action plan looks like and how best to transfer that person, if we need to transfer that person. Making sure we adapt the home environment to reduce the risk, so looking at furniture location, clutter, lighting. So again, like I said, we do a Westmead assessment. I mean, you can do whatever assessment is suitable to you and your organisation, but whatever assessment, looking at how do you manage that home environment to be as safe as possible to reduce the risk of falls. Adapt the conduction of activities, so, you know, rather than carrying items, placing them in pockets or getting someone else to carry them, making sure that their arms are free to move around and to stabilise if required. So just little tips and tricks. It might not be you that's with them all the time, it might be the support worker. But again, if you give these recommendations, it further helps not only the person but their support workers provide that support to that person. Promoting and educating on the need to concentrate while walking. Like I said before, we want to limit that dual task performance. So we want to make sure support workers are on board with that. You know, limiting as much sort of discussion as possible. We don't want to stop the discussion maybe altogether while we're mobilising, but just limiting it and being mindful that when that person's walking, they need to sort of concentrate on what they're doing. And really important to review and risk regularly as the condition progresses. So over time, their condition obviously will progress, and so we need to be reassessing their function and their risk of falls and other risk factors that might result in a fall. So for memory, so things to consider or strategies to use, so diaries, calendars, lists, whiteboards, sticky notes. So these are all things that can be implemented within that home environment to promote that person's independence. So routine boards, we've used these before quite successfully. So it might be even who the support person is on, you know, is it their name or is it a photograph of them? Who's their OT, who's their physio? What are they going to be doing that day? So it's very structured. They have that routine there. They know exactly what's happening. It just provides that consistency and also that security of knowing what's happening that day. Label or use prompts around the home. So if their memory is deteriorating, it might be putting little notes on cupboards to say like cups, mugs, glasses, bowls, plates, cutlery, things like that. Really simple stuff, but again, it doesn't show massively everywhere, but it's just little things that they can see. They go, oh, that's right, that's in there. Be concise as much as possible. Use closed questions that require a reduced amount of effort rather than sort of open-ended questions that might require a lot of energy. So those sort of things to consider when you're first going into the appointment or ongoing appointments. Making sure that you use short sentences to convey information and allowing the person time to respond. So being mindful that, you know, socially we usually respond immediately. That person might need a couple of seconds. They might need a minute. They might need a couple of minutes. But just being patient and just allowing them that time to sort of process that information and then respond to it. Reducing external stimulation as much as possible. So that might be closing a window if you've got like a rubbish truck outside that's making quite a lot of noise, or if you're near a park and there's quite a lot of kids screaming, closing windows or, you know, shutting off the TV. That way they can concentrate on what you're saying. I do have a client that doesn't like the TV turned off, but that's okay. We just sort of go into a different room sometimes. So you might not be able to turn off the TV. You might just have to adapt to going somewhere else. So But being mindful of those things, and also making sure you always ask to do something in their home, because again, it is their home. They are the ones that know themselves better than we do. We're just there to provide a level of support. So behaviours, so making sure to identify the trigger and avoid it as much as possible, depending on what the behaviour is. Work with relevant key stakeholders, if required, engaging a positive behaviour support practitioner if those behaviours are quite complex, and we need to be sort of tracking those behaviours and identifying strategies and things. So it depends on sort of what the behaviours are, and looking at how we can find solutions. Making sure we recommend a PBS clinician if required. Again, it depends on the type, the frequency of those behaviours. So some people with Huntington's do have impaired insight, and so we need to ensure that we provide prompting if required. So, do you need to use the bathroom? Do you need to go for a shower? Or do you think it's time to go for a shower? So making sure that even if it's not you, even if it is support workers, like I said, you're still recommending those strategies to support workers so that they can do the best within their shift in those times. So after death. So this is something that's often not talked about because it is an uncomfortable topic, but it does need to be discussed. So collection of equipment, what I've found to be sort of a really good and respectful process is to contact the family or the key stakeholders, apologising for the loss, thanking for the opportunity to be a part of their journey, and respecting the next steps, and that they can contact when is the right time for them in relation to the equipment. So some people just need a little bit of time before, we sort of jump in and start trying to collect equipment. So again, making sure you respect that space, but also provide them the information on what to do next. So for hire equipment, ensure it's collected. I always like to let the the supplier know of the sensitivity to make sure that when they come to collect the equipment, that I'm also there, but it's done in a respectful manner. And it's not sort of done in a hurry or in any way. So that way they're aware of what's happened, and so they can make sure their behaviour is according to the current circumstances. Purchase equipment. So sometimes people are not sure what to do with it. So a lot of it is just about advising that they own the equipment now. It can be kept, sold, or donated. So again, giving that information to the family or to the stakeholders. That way they can make the informed decision of what to do next. Seek support if required. What we do brings meaning to lives of our clients and those closest, and also to us as professionals and humans. It's okay to reach out to colleagues or other relevant professionals for support after the death of a client. So it can be overwhelming when you do have a client that you've worked with for quite a long time who has passed away. And it is okay to be upset. You build a therapeutic relationship with that client, and sometimes that can be over a number of years. So it is important, if you need to, debrief with colleagues, seek professional support outside of your workplace. Like at opportunOTy, we offer everyone the employee assistance program. So, if we needed to discuss something with a psychologist, we can do that. So like I said, what we do brings meaning to people's lives. It's really important to us and to them, which is why we are OTs. We love making a difference, but it can be quite difficult when you do experience the loss of a client. So making sure that you know that you can seek that support, and that you don't feel that that's judged at all, because the work we do, I think, is awesome. The work that we do, is incredible, and we work extremely hard for our clients, and it's okay to be upset after the loss. Thank you. So that's what all we've got today. If you have any questions, please feel free to write in the chat box or say them out loud on, if you want to unmute yourself. I'll try and answer as many of them as I can. Like I said, I'm not an expert 100%. I've worked with people with Huntington's for quite a number of years. I'll do my best.
So there was, someone just commented they had to go. I thought it was a question, but here we go. There's a question from Gemma.
Yep. So I can share the Westmead assessment. Our standardized assessments we use, it depends on the person. We use a variety. Like for psychosocial, we use the life skills profile, the HONOS, the routine task inventory, the Cohen-Mansfield agitation assessment. For cognitive, we do the executive skills questionnaire. For physical, we do like the brief pain inventory, fatigue severity scale, the falls risk for older persons, depending the MBI, but it depends on the person. The Bristol ADL depends on the person. The CANS depends on the person. The HUDAS. What else do we do? The FIM, depending. What else do we do? Yeah, those are sort of most of the ones that we do. Like I said, we just reassess those. We do the COPM as well for goal setting. Yeah, I think those are the main ones that we use. But yeah, I can share the Westmead. Do you have, if you want to write your email address, and I can send that through. I don't have a copy of it right now.
Oh, I'll send through Gemma's. It's Gemma, wasn't it? I can send you Gemma's email after this if you like. Any more questions? I know obviously we've only got a smaller group watching this time because we had such a big group last time, and a lot of them are really looking forward to watching the recording that we're doing today, because a lot of people got a lot out of it and said they were really, there was so much information, they're really looking forward to rewatching it and picking up even more information from watching it. So if anybody doesn't have any more questions, I guess we could probably call it a day and let Talisha get back to the all-important work that she does. Again, thank you. We cannot thank you enough for the time that you give us to help us share your knowledge with clients with Huntington's. You know, it's such a rare disease, and, you know, it's really hard to find people that get to work with people, multiple people with the disease. So having you as a knowledge base has been of great benefit for us. We've called on you a few times for some advice and help in the past, and you know, we thank you so much for that. Thank you for the people that were able to attend today. And yes, if you've got any more questions, if you think of any questions after we get offline today, please feel free to drop an email through to me, and I will organise those questions to go through to Talisha, and she'll be able to answer them for you. And I guess Friday afternoon, we should probably all, you know, get going and let Talisha get back to work. So thanks again.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, thanks, everyone. Bye.